Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CTMP 60 podcast, the official podcast of Canadian Tire Motorsport Park. We are so excited to bring you this show. It's something that we've talked about for a long time, but it seemed so fitting to do it as part of our celebration for 60 years of racing history at CTMP. Being stuck inside due to COVID, as well as the anniversary celebration, we see this as an opportunity to bring you some great stories as told by some of the important figures in Canadian motorsport, the scene and the community. And as we share these stories and history, we're going to be going from the beginning, the Mosport years, all the way through to the present day at Canadian Tire Motorsport Park. My name is Sam Fellows, and I will be your host on this podcast journey, and hopefully on other occasions, as is the case today. I am joined by my co-host, the mayor of Mosport himself, my dad, Mr. Ron Fellows, and we have a super special guest for the very first episode. Someone very well known in the motorsport community. He is a Canadian journalist, specifically a motorsport journalist since 1969, and he was at the very first Players 200, the very first professional motorsport event at CTMP, then Mosport, in June of 1961. He is a member of the Canadian Motorsport Hall of Fame, and he's our friend, Mr. Norris McDonald.
That's one of my favorite stories, is when you went to the Trillium Health Center and the doctor gives you the once over and he says, "What do you do for a living, Mr. Fellows?" And you said, "I'm a professional race car driver." And he said, "How stupid is that?" Yes. And you said, "Oh yeah, how much money do you make?"
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Awesome. So thanks, Norris, so much for coming on today. And we're just going to talk about the history of Mosport up through the years until what it is today as Canadian Tire Motorsport Park. But one of the first things I wanted to ask all the guests that come on is, what's the first memory you have of being at Mosport?
My first memory was the first Players 200 in 1961. And I was 19 years old, and I was crazy about car racing and cars generally, although I tended at that time to be more interested in Indy cars and stock cars and midgets, because that was more North American oriented then. But I mean, the idea that, number one, there was this world-class racetrack was going to open in the middle of June, and Sterling Moss was coming to race. Olivier Jean de Bien, did I pronounce that correctly? Yep. All the guys from who were legends at that time in Canadian racing, Ludwig Heimrath and that crowd, Denny Code, it was absolutely, and I crammed myself in there with about 40,000 other people, and it was it was as primitive could be. Let me say that right now. Yeah. It had started life as a cattle farm, and there was still a lot of the old cattle farm idea, there. I mean, yeah, well, no, not necessarily remnants, but there was no garages, there was no hospitality center as you have a Canadian Tire Motorsport Park now. There was no place. I was just there as a fan, but there was no real place for media to work. And it was, to get into the infield, and I know, Ron, that when you and Carlo took the place over, the first thing you did was to build a proper tunnel so that people could get in and out without too much trouble during the. So it really was, as they say, primitive. There was no running water. The outhouses were permanent wooden structures. that were worth your life to go into. And I'll tell you, I got to tell you a funny story, okay? And this is getting ahead of 1961. This would have happened around 68 or 69 when Harvey Hudis had really kind of taken control at that time with his partner, Bernie Kamen. And a very, very well-known, I don't want to embarrass him, very, very well-known Canadian motorsport writer, not me, but a guy who was famous, known from one end of the country to the other, decided in the middle of well, it might have been 69, the first year you were there, Ron. Anyway, decided to go down to Moss Corner to see how the Formula One cars went through there. And he got down there and felt the call of nature and knew that he was not going to be able to get back to the tower, which existed at that time. And so he had to use this primitive facility that was still there. And it was, as I say, worth your life to go into it. So he took a deep breath and went in and he did what he had to do. And then he discovered there was no toilet paper.
Oh boy.
And he had to clean himself up using his socks. And so when he did get back to the tower, he told Harvey Hudis about his adventure. And that Christmas, he got a present from Harvey Hudis delivered to his house, and it was a new pair of socks. But anyway, 1961 was the year that Mosport, came of. And remember, I mean, as well as for the Players 200 and Moss and who won the thing handily, by the way, and Ludwig, of course, was the top Canadian. So it was a great day all round. Yeah. And they had 2 heats so that you got to see 2 starts and the rest of it. But, Mosport had its difficulties in the early years. It went into receivership. It finally was sold. It was sold to the publishers of Canada Track and Traffic, who came up with formed a company called Cantrack. And that's how Hudis and Kamen came to be involved with Mosport. They weren't motor racing people. Harvey was an accountant and Bernie was a lawyer, and they were hired by Cantrack to do the legal work and to look after the books. And thank goodness that it all worked out that way. Yeah. Because it was 61. The first Grand Prix, a sports car race won by Peter Ryan, who at that time, Roger Penske said he could have been a world champion if but he went to Europe and unfortunately passed away in a Formula Junior race over there. But it was just a wonderful, wonderful time. And then, of course, 67, you had the Indy cars. And a lot of people, Ron, as you're a historian of the place yourself, you know what I'm saying here. But, everybody thinks that the first major open wheel race was the Grand Prix. And the Grand Prix was beaten by 2 months by the Indy cars that came in the middle of June and got rained out. And at that time, they didn't have rain tires. And boy, oh boy, I'll tell you a funny story about this one. All the cars in the 60s were tanks. I mean, they were not the compact cars that we have today. Right. And so, if you got 35 or 40,000 people showing up for a car race at Mosport, we've all seen those marvelous aerial shots that shows all the cars parked all over the place and outside on the roads leading in and out. And, and that's just because they were so big that, and then people did because they didn't want to go in through those tunnels and get caught in the infield, or you might be there for days. But anyway, the IndyCar race got called off because of the rain. And so this massive mob of people starts heading back toward Toronto and got ensnarled in the cottage traffic of the weekend. And of course, the race was sponsored by the Toronto Telegram and called the Telegram Trophy Race. And so, and seriously, the joke is that there's still people, that there are still people who are coming up out of caverns and caves up near Mosport that still trying to get home from that awful race in 1967. But the Star runs a big front page headline the next day: traffic chaos in Ontario caused by Telegram car race. And then, of course, 69 was when you arrived on the scene, Ron.
Yes, indeed.
That was your first, tell us about that.
Yeah, my uncle was involved in rallying. He and his buddy, and we had a little bit of taste of concession karting, and was very interested, having seen a few races on TV up to that point. But it was really, really cool. Left in the dark.
Right.
In September, I guess it was September the 20th, I believe, was the actual date.
Right.
And wanted my uncle and his buddy, they wanted to get there nice and early so we could get at that time the front straight grandstand, which is where the event center is now, was not pre-assigned seating. It was first come, first served. So they wanted to get right at the very top. So we got there, and I think it was 7 a.m, and we were at the very top of the grandstand and waiting for the cars to come out. And I'll never forget sitting there when the morning warm up started, and the first couple of cars came by. One of them was Matra Power, and then a Ferrari, and then a Cosworth, and it was just absolutely magic. Hey, goosebumps now still. But it was as I've said before, for an 11-year-old to have an epiphany, that was it.
Well, motorsport, you went on to have a great career as a driver and as a representative for various car companies, primarily General Motors. But just for a fan, it is without a doubt one of the most exhilarating sports known to mankind. Yeah. You have got speed. You've got, let's not kid ourselves, you've got danger. 100%. You've got speed. You've got magic names, as you mentioned, Ferrari, McLaren. I mean, just going back to the 60s here for a couple of minutes,
grab them.
Absolutely. You had
Surtees
Jack
was in the
Brabham,
70s.
John Surtees, Graham Hill, Chris Amon, Dan Gurney, Mario Andretti. I mean, you can go on and on and on. And that was the big attraction, because these guys were gods, right? It wasn't like today. You can turn on the television any day of the week or every night and find a car race or a tape of a car race someplace.
Yeah, true.
And so consequently, it becomes part of the woodwork. But in those days, Jackie Eats was coming to race at Mosport. Jackie Stewart was coming to race at Mosport. And just the idea of being able to see those guys. I mean, the very, very first, the first Formula One race, the cars all came over on an Air France freight plane and landed at what was then known as Malton 2 days before they took them up to Mosport. And I was great friends. I was on the Globe and Mail at the time, and I was great friends with a guy named John Burns, who lived and died for Jimmy Clark. And we're talking one after we got off work around 6 o'clock, and Burns, who was a bit of a daredevil in all aspects of his life, said, why don't we go out and see if we can see the cars? So we go out to Malton and we find this hangar. I'm not kidding you. And there's one security guard. And here is the one Ferrari, because they just brought one for Chris Amon. But here's the BRMs, here's the Lotuses. I mean, here they all are sitting there, and we're walking around looking at these things and inside, and I'm afraid because, you know, I got a fair amount of nerve myself, but I thought to myself, you know, my goodness, is Burns going to try to sit in one of these things? Thank goodness he didn't, because that would have been bad. But I mean, you know, how magical can that be?
Yeah.
Just be that close to seeing how things are.
Yep.
And then, of course, because most of the drivers had not had prior experience at Mosport, they had a practice on the Thursday.
Oh, wow.
Before they actually got into the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So that was amazing because there was hardly any spectators there. So you could wander around the pits and this, that, and the other thing. Sometime I'll show you pictures some guy took on the other side of the fence, and I'm standing there right beside Graham Hill and about an elbow away from Jimmy Clark. And how great is that?
Yeah.
To just be there.
Yeah. You know, when we did the 50-year celebration
Mm-hmm.
at our place in 2017, listening to, Epi, and Epi was a pretty quiet guy, but getting an opportunity to run the third Lotus and his teammates were Jim Clark and Graham Hill.
Hill.
Yeah. So cool. Yeah. They have, and then he didn't get, I think, did he not miss a few? I think he missed a few sessions because I think Clark crashed and had to take his car
on the Thursday.
Yeah,
on the Thursday, Clark went off at turn 1, and it was Epi's car. So he had to use Epi's car while they repaired his car, and so Epi hardly got any practice at all.
Yeah.
But there's a great story about that race. One of the few, I mean, just about everything has been said or written about that race. But I've always thought Epi told me this not long before he passed, that he, if you get any outside help, it's looked upon in those days as outside interference, and you were disqualified.
Yeah.
But again,
still the case at Le Mans.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah.
In 67, of course, there's no television around the course, there's no radio around the course. So I'm sure all sorts of things went on. But in this particular case, Epi said that as he was rounding Moss, about maybe 10 laps before he had to pack it in, because the Lotus electrics were so low in the back of the car, and if you were in the rain, the water got in there and you conked out. And so he stopped just on the inside between 5A and 5B, and he gets out of the car and he's kind of looking at it thinking, well, what the hell am I going to do now? And some guy runs up to him with a T-shirt and says, here, dry off the spark plugs with this. And I said to the guy, I don't know whether that's legal. And the guy said, Well, the other guy who stalled up here, he did it. And so and it turned out it was Clark.
That's awesome.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a million stories you talk to people about because, as I say, it's all there. One of my favorite stories, again, the Sundown Grand Prix. You know, this was a 6-hour race that well, you know what I'm talking about, and they started it. If it was in the summertime in July, they would wait till about 9 o'clock at night to start it because the idea would be to run half of it when there was light and half of it in the dark. And there was a couple of racing brothers, the Beitzik brothers.
Yes.
Harry and Klaus.
Klaus, yes.
And they usually went in the Sundown together. But for whatever reason, Klaus couldn't make the race. And Harry was talking to his friend Jacques Bienvenu in Quebec. And Bienvenu didn't have a partner either. So they came up with the idea that they would be each other's co-drivers and that they would each start in their own car, and then halfway through, they just switch cars, right?
Wow.
And finish the race. And they thought that was hilarious until the organizers found out and said, no, you can't do that, right? So Bienvenu didn't care, but Harry really had the bit in his teeth at that time. And you know, and so he's walking around, and who does he run into but Horst Kroll? Now, Horst was running in the Formula 5000 series at the time.
Yes.
And there was nothing going on. And as Horst told me I did an interview with him once, and he said, you know, I was feeling a little rough because I had a girlfriend. I'd been out the night before. I wasn't particularly interested in going to Mosport, but she wanted to go. So, you know, we're walking through the pits, and here's Harry coming along, and Harry says, Horst, you want to go in the race? And Horst said, you know, Harry, I'm kind of hungover. I don't really feel like it. And besides, I don't have my helmet. I don't have my, you know, and his girlfriend said, I'll go get it. So she, whoever she was, drives back into Toronto, gets the helmet, gets the other stuff, comes out. By that time, Horst is feeling a little better. He's had a couple of those delicious racers steaks known as hot dogs from the Mosport restaurant, and so and they go in the race and they won it.
Wow.
1967. Harry,
never go to the track without your gear when you're a driver. Come on, Horst.
Well, you'll have to talk to him someday when you join him at the Mosport in the Sky, right? But there was millions of stories. 66, for example, Billy Foster brought his Indy car up to Mosport. And the reason he did, it was a USAC stock car race, which was won, and this is one of the great trivia questions of all time. Who won the stock car race at Mosport in 1960? A used car salesman from Chicago named Sal Tabella. And he beat Andretti, he beat Foyt, he beat Norm Nelson, he beat Don White, he beat Foster.
Right.
You know,
was that a two-race format too back then?
Yeah.
A double race?
Yeah. And then they would put it all together on the time, right? But yeah, Sal Tabella. So the next time you want to entertain people at a party, Ron, you can say, hey, guess who, right? But anyway, and you know something, in everything you read, whether it's newspaper reports or whether it's various histories, it says that Foster, and they wanted to find out if it would work at Mosport because they were hoping to bring, to run a race but they didn't know whether or not the Indy cars would be able to maneuver around the place. So that's why, as well as the fact that it was Billy Foster, and he was an Indianapolis driver, and so the crowd was really quite interested in seeing it. But in all these things, it says that he took 2 laps going counterclockwise before turning around and going 2 or 3 laps clockwise. Now that's not correct. And the reason I know it's not correct is because I was standing with Foster, because although I still was not covering car racing at this point as part of my jobs, I was there as a fan, and I had wangled a press pass through Jim Vipond at the Globe where I was working. And while I'm there, I interview Billy Foster. And so Foster was talking with some people while I'm standing there. And somebody said, well, you should go counterclockwise. And Foster said, I don't know whether that'd be such a good idea. I don't think that if I really get wound up, whether I would be able to stop this thing to be able to take Moss Corner the wrong way.
Yeah.
And so, but for some reason, that became fact, and it never happened. Wow. He only did it the correct way, as we know. And, but it worked. It worked. And you know what else happened that day? That was the one and only time Juan Manuel Fangio was in Canada, and it was at Mosport.
Wow.
And
but was he racing?
Was not racing.
Wow.
Although he did participate in a race. The organizers got a couple of got 6, I think, Austin Healy minis, I think Sprites, but I could be wrong. But they were no, it couldn't have been a Sprite because these were hard tops. So I guess they were just Austin minis. Anyway, Fangio and Innes Ireland and another couple of guys got in this thing, and Ireland put on a great show because, of course, they had a standing start. I mean, it was all for fun, right? They had a standing start, and the guy drops the green, and everybody goes off, and of course, Innes Ireland is in reverse, so he goes backwards. So he gets a big cheer from the crowd for that. Then he goes down to Moss and rolls the thing on purpose, right? And gets out of it and bows to the crowd, much like Jean Alesi did when he won the Grand Prix in Montreal many years later. Remember when he stopped the Ferrari there, got out? So there's a million stories. A million.
That's awesome.
But so Fangio actually did race though.
In an unofficial
right.
A celebrity race.
It was a celebrity.
Exactly.
It was a celebrity race. So he was never in a race, but he was at Mosport in a race.
Oh.
So yes, lots.
When did you start covering motorsports as a journalist?
1969.
Okay.
And it was the Indianapolis 500. It was just a last-minute deal. Dick Beddoes, who was the sports columnist for the Globe and Mail at the time, had always gone to Indianapolis and decided at the last minute, for whatever reason, that he didn't want to go. And Jim Vipond called me up. Actually, this is a funny story, if you've got a minute.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Well,
please.
Well, I get this call from Jim Vipond, who's the sports editor of the Globe, and he says, Norris, he says, how'd you like to go to Indianapolis? I said, is the Pope Catholic? You know, I said, what do you want me to drive down or what? You know, I mean, this is 3:00 in the afternoon before the race.
Oh, wow.
And he said, no, I want you to go tomorrow morning, be at 7:00, be at Millard Air at Malton, as everybody called the airport. And he's going to give you a ride down and bring you back. So I go down there, and here's Frank Orr from the Toronto Star is there, and he was writing. Frank wrote about hockey all winter and car racing all summer. It was the perfect beat as far as, anybody was concerned, right? Yeah. And so Frank and I are on this plane, and there's nobody else, and it's a DC-3. It's an old DC-3. Now we get down, cover the race, Mario Andretti's one and only win.
Yeah.
Go back to what was then called Weird Cook Municipal Airport, by the way. That was the name of the airport in Indianapolis. And Frank and I, we shared a cab out there, and we get to the plane, and we're not the only two going back. It turns out that George Eaton and all his pals who've been down there for the month, and Paul Cook was on that plane. You should ask him about this sometime. And
I've not heard that story from Paul.
We get on the plane, and the plane is completely packed. And the luggage compartment, there isn't enough room for all the luggage because these people have been there for 30 days. And so you're sitting on the plane, and here's, suitcases and trunks up in the aisle. And I said to Frank, I said, I think we're really overloaded, and Frank says, the guy knows what he's doing. So, so I'm sitting in the seat by the window. Frank is sitting there. We start to rumble off, and we going and going. I'm looking out the window, and there's a line of trees just past the end of the runway. And we're just, and finally you feel the thing starting up, and then it bounced, and then went up, and then it bounced again, and it's going up, and I'm looking up thinking, well, we're going to die. But what better day to go than at the Indianapolis 500? So we cleared those trees maybe by 10 feet. It wasn't much. And it's then we realized, Frank Orr and I realized that we were holding hands.
That's funny. We're gonna die.
Gonna die. I know. God. Hey, listen, we could go on for hours, but we're talking about Mosport.
CTMP,
Ron, since you took over the place, what is your fondest memory of standing with Carlo, and when did it really hit you that this was really something special?
Yeah, I think it was Linda, Carlo, and I. We were up on the hill, and it was the very first, the 2012. Canadian Tire was it was the first year of our partnership with Canadian Tire. We were up on the hill by start finish, and it was a beautiful day, in the 70s, and just to see the turnout for our Capital Victoria Day Speed Fest. It was just, wow, this is easy, right? It was a really cool moment to just see up in the hill and see so many people had come out for the event, and we'd done a fair amount of promotion. Canadian Tire had done a ticket promotion, and it was just really cool for our opening event on Sunday race day, just to see so many people there. It was awesome.
Yeah. Well, and IMSA, and that would have been the first year of the trucks, which had to have been a thrill.
Yeah, gosh, this is
2013, I think.
2013. Yeah, it was
2013?
first year trip. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was certainly a proud moment as well. I was on the I was down near the Michelin Bridge, just to get a perspective of the start, and yeah, that was super cool. And again, just an incredible turnout of spectators for the first Chevy Silverado 250, and to see the roar of NASCAR, get the green flag at Canadian Tire Motorsport Park for the first one was awesome.
Right. No. And that truck race, I mean, everything is great at CTMP. It really is. Everything is great.
It's it's another really good point to bring up. And the track layout, it doesn't matter whether it's a downforce cars or low downforce, big horsepower like NASCAR is. The track just races really well. And
right.
On the ownership side with Linda and Carlo being able to go out and watch a little bit, you get sidetracked just watching. It's just incredible. And certainly our NASCAR finishes are legendary.
I was going to say.
Speaking of the first one, yes.
Well, I mean, the first one was won by the guy who's now the NASCAR Cup champion.
Yep.
I mean, and all all those young guys who are in NASCAR now were racing at CTMP in the trucks 2 or 3, 4 years ago, right?
Yep.
Have you had a disappointment, Ron? Is there something that you would, would you, let me lead you on. Would you like an Xfinity race here? Would you dare to like a Cup race here?
Yes and yes. That's that's ultimately the goal. That you look at the success of the Camping World Truck Series events. There is no question that Xfinity and Cup would put on an incredible show, and that's still the goal, is to is continuing to work towards that end. And no, I think the only disappointment, there was the very first Camping World Truck Series race. There was an opportunity to actually be in the race in 2013, right. and I turned it down. I thought, no, I need to be on the outside for the very first one. I'd just be so distracted, and trying to race that weekend. It just wouldn't work. So I thought, maybe in 2014 I do it, but anyway, I never did. But I don't regret not doing it, but it would have been maybe in 14 or 15, and would have been kind of fun to get into one of the truck races. And it was the truck series did a lot for me in the NASCAR family.
Yeah.
In terms of getting future opportunities to get paid well in all the road races. So.
Well, there's another fellows who's moderating this discussion today, or at least recording it. And, I'd kind of, like to see him carrying on in maybe a truck race, right?
Yes.
A dad.
Yeah. Keep talking, Norris.
Dad.
Yes. Yeah. And there's no question that the other, in my career as a driver, Linda and I made a pact when we got married that we would always travel together. So we traveled together as a family as much as we could to all the races all over the place. Right. Le Mans, you name it. And in the capacity now as part of the ownership, both for Linda and I with Carlo, it's we continue on. Sam's working full time, son Patrick works part time, so here we are. It continues to be a big family affair.
It's a family business.
100%. Yeah,
it's a family business.
Yep.
Right.
And Miles has been there. Oh man, he's got to be. It might be above 45 years, but his daughter, Miles' daughter works there.
Yeah. But Miles would have been 70 or 71, right?
He started working there as a kid cutting grass.
Yeah. And
worked his way all the way to the president, and he continues to talk about what all the things that he learned from Harvey, and Harvey was like a second father to him, and that was a long run for that ownership group. 1966, and Harvey died in 96.
Right.
But that's a long, very successful ownership run.
Well, something. I mean, with due respect to you and Carlo and Andy Evans and Dr. Panos, if it wasn't for Harvey Hudis, it would have been a farm again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
he was stole, and
he was a businessman. Yeah. He was able to make a relevant business out of it, and removing the emotion, the passion of the sport, and that's easier said than done.
Okay, my favorite Harvey Hudis story. I mean, there's many, but my favorite. In 1968, we're going back. 1968, he's running the place for Cantrack, and he gets wind of the fact that very quietly, Johnny Bassett, the son of John Bassett Sr., the publisher of the Telegram, and George Eaton, up-and-coming Formula One racer, and finished his career in Indy cars, he gets wind of the fact that they have created a company called Lakeshore Raceway Holdings Limited.
Right.
And their deal is to essentially take the IndyCar race and the Formula One race from Mosport and run it where essentially the Honda Indy is run today.
Wow.
With one exception. The old CNE grandstand where the Blue Jays played their first games, but where the Argos played for years, that was going to be their pit straight. And so they figured that they could get everybody and their dogs sitting in the grandstands to watch the pit stops and that sort of stuff. But so Hudis and Kamen sit down, and it's pretty well along. These guys have done a great job. They've been talking quietly to Toronto City Council. They've been talking to this board and that board and this, that, and the other thing. And this is going to happen. And they decided naturally that they had to put a stop to it, because if they lost the Grand Prix and the IndyCar race, well, they had the Can-Am, and they, but really their two biggest events were on. And you can imagine as a co-owner now what that would do to you. So they went to the Lakeshore or the Parkdale Ratepayers Association and scared the living daylights out of those people, that the noise would be horrendous. Now remember, they'd had stock car races at the CNE going back to the 50s. They had the air show every year during the exhibition, when incidentally it was a real air show. Like, in other words, they weren't using trainers these, you know, whether it was the Blue Angels or the Golden Hawks, the Canadian Golden Hawks, whatever, these were fighter jets, right? So you could hear them in Hamilton. And anyway, got these people so wound up that they went en masse to Toronto City Council and said, if you approve this race or these races, none of you will be elected the next time there's an election in this town, because we will start today and we will not stop to get you all out of office. And so it just kind of blew up, right? Now, 10 years later, when the Grand Prix went to Montreal, Labatt figured, you know, look, we've got to throw Mosport a little bone here. So we're going to get a round of the World Endurance Championship. We'll run it through the CNE like Bassett and Eaton had done, you know, thought of doing in the 60s. And we'll cut Mosport in on the action. So everything was fine until the Ratepayers Association found out about it. So Harvey and Bernie go down to the ratepayers and said, we were just kidding. Really wasn't going to be that bad. And they said, you made your bed, you're going to have to lie in it, right? There's so many things that you can talk about that. Well, you know, at one time when Mosport opened in 1961, you couldn't camp. There was no camping allowed. And it was the mid 60s, probably maybe 64, 65, when, because there was a demand, people were showing up with tents and stuff. They wanted to stay. And so they had to do some negotiating with what Durham Township would have been called at the time. I have no idea. But they had to make a deal. And the deal was you could only camp if you lived 200 miles away. Okay. Now, I'm not making this up. I'm not making this up. You had to live 200 miles away and then you could camp. And so, you know, kids have been going across the border forever with phony ID, right? To get into, you know, there was more people camping at Mosport with identification that said that they lived in Moncton, New Brunswick. In order to be able to camp there. And then I don't think that there was ever a time where somebody said, okay, I think it just became a campground. You know, it just, you know, finally at one point, people, you know, it just, and of course the first race, can I go back to the very first race that I was at? They had 40,000 people show up.
Yeah, unbelievable.
They
pictures are incredible.
They hadn't printed enough tickets.
Wow.
So it got to the point where they were just saying, give us the money, you can go in. And then they had so much money. And remember, they didn't have the Esso or Castrol Tower. So they had a car known only to a couple of people where they were putting all this cash in the trunk.
Oh my.
And in the middle of the night, they snuck it all down the road to Bowmanville to a credit union down there, where the guy who ran the credit union, the president or whatever, was a race fan. And they made a deal with him to let them into the credit union to the safe to put all the cash in there. Oh, and the other thing, talking about cash, did you know that Jack Brabham, when he won the first Formula One Grand Prix of Canada in '67, would not take a check? He won $2,000. He wanted the $2,000 in cash in a garbage bag. And that is how, because he didn't want to have to go through the pain of trying to get a check made out to him from the Canadian Racing Drivers Association or somebody, in Canada, trying to cash that in London. It would get held up for years. So if he took the cash, they would accept the cash. And so there you go. So your cash and garbage bags have got a long history. At Mosport.
It was a Canadian currency. Do we know that?
Well, it was, yes. Yes, it was Canadian currency. It was owned, and even the because the second race that they had, which I was not at, that I am kicking myself, was a USAC stock car race. And they had Paul Goldsmith and AJ Foyt and Eddie Sachs and Parnelli Jones and all the guys who raced the Champ cars. They also drove the stock cars. Yeah. And so they were all up there. And other than a couple of them complained about the fact that, what am I going to do with this? They're looking at a $20 Canadian bill. Yeah. Well, what am I going to do with this when I get back across the border? Right. I think some of them had been, Jim Hurtubise was there too. And I think he calmed everybody down by saying that, they could stop in on Buffalo on the way back because everybody knew him in Buffalo. And so if he would go into a bank with a whole bunch of race car drivers. Anyway, it's wonderful stuff.
Crazy stuff.
Norris, were you a fan or interested in racing and motorsport before Mosport was established in 1961?
Oh yeah. When my dad took me to the movies once in Kapuskasing, where we lived when I was a child, it was a double bill. And the first movie was an Abbott and Costello movie, but the second one was called The Big Wheel with Mickey Rooney. Wow. And it was about an Indianapolis driver, right? Wow. And Johnny Coy was his name, right? And and I saw that movie, and from then on, as I've kidded for years, all the other kids wanted to play for the Leafs or the Canadians. I wanted to win the Indianapolis 500. Yes, and so consequently, and it was really difficult to be a fan in those days because there was no news in the paper, and
it was all magazines.
Yeah, and you had to wait for 2 or 3 months. Motor Trend, which used to have a little racing thing at the end, right? And so you kind of kept up. But when I got my license,
where did the racing happen before there was Mosport?
Well, in all the airports, all the airports from one end of Canada to the other that had been built specifically for the Second World War, there was a lot of flight training done in Canada where they brought other potential pilots from the Commonwealth, whether it be from India or Australia or England, and Canada is where they trained people. And so you had, at the end of the war, you had all these airports then just sitting there doing nothing. And Harewood Acres, for example, and Green Acres down near Goderich, Saint Eugene, near the Ontario-Quebec border, was where the Quebecers raced before they built Le Circuit. And so it was easy to put up a couple of hay bales to mark out the course. And that was really kind of when sports car racing got going in Canada, because all of the Canadian soldiers who had had been overseas had been exposed to these European sports cars. And so, of course, they came back to Canada and they wanted them over here. And that was when sports cars started to be imported. And what do you do with a sports car? You race it. And so all of those airports were used. The first road course, permanent road course in Canada, of course, was Westwood in British Columbia, which opened in '59. And it's a
I did not know that. Yeah.
It's a subdivision now.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it's unfortunate. It was really a nice
fun track. Yep.
Were you there? Did you ever race on it?
I did. I raced in an endurance race in I'm thinking it's probably '88. It was the year we went out there to shoot to participate in the MacGyver episode at Westwood. It was all the players' GM cars. Yeah. Right, so I ran an enduro there with gosh, I forgot. I think I was teamed with Murray Craig or somebody like that. And yeah, we ran an enduro there. It was fun.
Oh yeah, and it was generally track.
Wet. It was great fun. Great fun to drive. Yeah.
And awesome. And the Sports Car Club of British Columbia, they built it. They managed to get the money together, and of course, the problem is that all of these people, bless their hearts, had stars in their eyes, and they didn't think it through, or we might never have had any of these places. I mean, Mosport, they bought that farm for $30,000. It was 450 acres, and then they had to buy another 50 off the county because something happened in the zoning or whatever. But anyway, it wound up initially as 500 acres. They got it for 30,000 and kind of said, "Hey, we're home free." And by the time they figured out what was going to cost them to pave the track and to do everything else, they were up $250,000-300,000. Oh. And I mean, that today would be worth, I don't know, $75-80 million.
Yep.
I mean, a lot of money. And that's why, I mean, at the end of the first year, it went into receivership, and National Trust became the trustee. And thank goodness National Trust had a couple of people on their board who were interested in car racing, because they could have just closed it down.
Yeah.
But they essentially were the landlord and let the car clubs, Bempsey and the Deutscher Club and the rest of them at that time, plus the Canadian Racing Drivers Association, they would essentially let those folks rent the track from them for a weekend to hold a race. And as I say, eventually Harvey managed to straighten it all out and begin to pay it off. And as he said, if they had a great year, he put money into the track. If they didn't have a good year, the track stayed the way it was. Did you know? Let me ask you a couple of questions about the people who came before you, though. Here we're talking about Harvey. There were a few people between Harvey and you. Did you know Andy Evans? What kind of a guy was he?
Yeah, no, I had the distinction of actually getting to drive for Andy.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
yeah. Well, so in sports car, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. So when he bought in, did he buy in probably late '96? And
right.
They were Andy also, I think he ended up buying IMSA at that point.
He bought everything.
Yeah.
He bought
So he brought, he was and he had a team with the Ferrari 333, and I got a call from him, and I think it was probably July of '97 or late June, early July, about driving a 333 at the World Sports Car Race at CTMP.
Right.
And it was one of these ones where you're, okay, who is this really? No, I'm serious. Okay, all right. And we want to have a high profile, up and coming Canadian be in one of our cars so we can promote this race. So that was, and I got to test the car at Putnam Park Raceway in Indianapolis.
Right.
It's a track when I drove for Buzz McCall with the Chevy Camaro Trans Am team, they were based in Indy, and we spent a lot of time shakedowns testing at Putnam Park. So anyway, the team I got to drive the 333 at Putnam Park when they were on their way back from Sonoma, headed for, I think their shop was, Andy's team was based in Indy back then, but
Right.
yeah, no, it was, that's how that came together. And then, getting the opportunity to race that car, that was as close as I was going to get to a Formula One car, because the engine in the back was out of a Formula One car back then. So it was a really cool moment to get and to drive with Rob Morgan and get the pole and win the race. It was spectacular. So and I didn't even know him at the time, but Ramo Ferry, Ferrari of Ontario. So Ferrari of Ontario was on the car, but I didn't know Ramo, and Ramo owns that car, still does.
Oh, really?
So, but yeah, no, Andy was good to me. He paid me well, and I got to run based on the success there. I got to run with the team at the Rolex 24 at Daytona in '98, and that was where I met Max Pappas for the first time. So
right.
I was in a car with Yannick Dalmas, Bob Wallach, Max Pappas, and myself, and we were on pole. It was basically our race to lose, and we did. I think we had a very rare mechanical issue with that thing, probably an hour and a half from the end. It was it was a catastrophic failure. It ended our opportunity to win the Rolex 24 in '98. But those were the years where those cars were unrestricted. They were 900. They weighed 900 kilos and had 780 horsepower. Just incredible. It was at Daytona. We would see, I don't know how fast we were going at CTMP, but I remember we were talking, the numbers at Daytona were coming through the tri-oval at anywhere between 211 and 214 was in terms of miles an hour. It was, they were fast cars. Andy was interesting guy. I didn't get to know him that well, but he was true to his word with me. And then he was out of it as fast as he got into it. And Don Panos was really the guy who took it over and had an incredible vision, because that year '97. I managed to win the NASCAR truck race at Watkins Glen, and then right after that was the World Sports Car event, and that was in August. And then in September, my contract was up with Chevrolet, and we had not been doing anything in '97, and right. I was summoned to Detroit for a meeting with Herb Fischel and Joe Negri, and they sat me down in the middle of September back then and talked about this, taking a Corvette to Le Mans. Would that be something I'd be interested in? And we'd like you to be our lead driver, and I'm in. And it's funny because when I remember talking with Joe and Herb about the GT category back then. there was sports car racing was going through some sanctioning issues, and the rules were evolving, and I was like, okay, I get we're going to go to Le Mans, but where are we going to race in the U.S.? Is it the U.S. Road Race Championship? Where are things at with IMSA? And Herb talked about this guy named Don Panos, who was buying, and he was going to create an American Le Mans series, and it'll be great. It'll be perfect for a place for us to, develop the Corvette race car and go to Le Mans. But that was the goal, was you wanted to take a Corvette to Le Mans and win, and that was that's 20 years ago this year.
Yeah,
Wow.
That's right. Time
Yes.
flies. Well, I don't want to be too nosy here, but your meeting with Fischel, did you not then subsequently become acquainted with one Jack Christie, who then managed to renegotiate that contract?
Actually, it was before that. Jack was it was in '94. Yeah, so
Okay.
I was with Ford and Tom Gloy, and I had lots of good friends at GM of Canada, and I was actually out in BC, Vancouver Island, at Peter Balget's house. We were having a little family vacation, and I get a call on my cell phone from Earl Dickinson.
Okay.
And this was halfway through the '94 Trans Am season, and Herb Fischel wanted to meet me, and I'd met Herb on the podium in June of '94 when he presented me with the trophy for winning the Chevy, Detroit Chevy, the Motor City 200, presented by Chevrolet, and here I was racing a Mustang, and I'd won, and Herb had sort of out of the side of his mouth on the podium said to me, "How do we get you in a Chevy?" And I'm holding, we're just little chat back and forth, and I just said, "All you got to do is call." So, and that's really how it started. And they contacted. There was a motorsports division at GM of Canada back then, and they got a hold of Earl Dickinson, and Earl called me all excited that we're going to get Herb wants to meet me. We ended up agreeing to race for Chevy, and yeah, Jack, I didn't want to get involved in any of the contract negotiating,
Right.
and because we wanted to keep it quiet as well.
Right.
Because everybody knew Scott Pruitt was leaving. It was like a 1-year deal for Pruitt. He was going back to IndyCar, and we wanted to keep it quiet. I was still under contract with Tom Gloy and Ford, so I talked to Jack, and so Jack went to Florida to meet Buzz McCall, who was the team owner of the Chevy Trans Am team, and he negotiated my first contract with Chevy. It was a nice 3-year deal. Yes.
Well, going back to Andy Evans, though, correct me if I'm wrong. Was he not the guy that took the hump out of the back straight at Mosport?
Well, it was I think they shaved it twice. Miles would be able to tell us for sure, but I'm pretty certain that it was reduced twice. It was after that. There was it 77 when on the Friday, one of the, and I've forgotten the driver's name, but it was a Hesketh that caught air and then flipped, and then it was
that was Ian Ashley. Yeah.
Ian Ashley, there you go. And badly hurt. And then also, I think there was a Can-Am car that had flipped, so they reduced the hump. And then the year that I ran with the Ferrari in '97, they had run World Sports Car there before, but they put a chicane in before the hump, and so this was
I've seen video of that. That looked
yeah,
super goofy.
it was just a moving tire wall that just got faster and faster as people hit it.
Yeah.
And I believe it was maybe 96, winter of 96 or spring of 96 or 97 when I believe they did some more work to it and got it to where it's less of an issue.
Right.
Because I can tell you in the Ferrari 333 it was flat right over the top. I couldn't do it today, but I did it then.
Yeah. Well, the first guy to have big problems with that hump was Bobby Unser back in '68. He'd won the Telegram Trophy race in '67, '68. He's on the pole, and the very first lap he comes over, and somehow the air got under the car and turned him just dead sideways, and he went across 8. And believe it or not, they had a drainage ditch there. I mean, seriously, the problem with car racing, and it will ever be thus. You never think it can happen until it does, right?
Right.
Anyway, there's this drainage.
They'll never hit over there.
Yeah, no. So there's this drainage ditch there, and the car must have gone 12 to 15 feet in the air and came down on its all 4 wheels, right? And Unser got a cut above knocked his helmet back. This is back to the open face helmets, knocked his helmet back. Anyway, I'm doing an interview with him 3 or 4 years ago, and we're chatting, and I asked him about that thing, and so he was saying that he was glad that he was under the impression that they'd been able to just get rid of it. But anyway, I'd said to him that I'd been with, I'd seen that happen. I had my girlfriend at the time was there with me, and when he went off, she screamed. And Bobby said, well, that wasn't her screaming, it was me.
Oh, what a character.
I know.
That's
He
awesome.
said, well, all those guys, and they're all kind of starting to fade away. Thank goodness for Dr. Panos, though, when
100%.
Andy, for whatever reason, my theory of Andy, that he ran, and still to this day, as far as I know, ran Bill Gates's money for him.
Wow.
And I think Gates had to get rid of some money. That's just because Andy came, and remember, it was the first year of the IRL, and he had 7 or 8 cars entered. And
I remember that.
Yeah, he did. My friend Joe Gosick from the Oswego Speedway, I knew I had to work that in somewhere today.
Oswego Speedway.
It's my claim to fame. But Joe drove one of Andy's cars in that race, and lasted 20 laps till it just conked out on him. But then Andy went on this, as you say, this incredible buying spree of Sebring and Road Atlanta and Mosport and IMSA, and then just as fast as like Sid Priddle, who's a friend of all of us, was working for Andy, and it was a Monday morning, 10 o'clock. Andy walks in and says, "Shut it all down, I'm done." And I think to myself, thank goodness Dr. Panos was there to step in.
Yeah.
To because that could have been another time where your track now could have just got overgrown and lost.
Yes, no question. Don was an incredible visionary, and his 2 loves in sport were golf and auto racing. and
Right.
he absolutely loved the history, which is, when you look at the racetracks that he acquired, they were all some of the oldest in sports car racing, road racing. They were some of the oldest and storied racetracks in North America. Between
Right.
Road Atlanta and Sebring and now Canadian Tire Motorsport Park. So when I called Don, called Dr. Don and initially talked to Scott Atherton about the prospect for purchasing. This was not something that Don was interested in doing, but when he met, when we first met with him, he and Carlo hit it off, and
Right.
and he literally was in the meeting that he said, what, this is I'm 75, and this is 2010. I'm
Right.
75 years old. Maybe this is the right time to return it to Canadian ownership, because he also shared a lot of the, when the economy went for a crap 08 in that area, 08, 09. He shared some plans with us about continued growth and infrastructure that he wanted to do. So it was pretty cool. But he blames us for his. That was the first of his basically selling tracks, and then selling the American Le Mans Series, and the long overdue the merger with Grand American Road Racing, which became IMSA again.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the thing is that, we've had lots of fun about talking about the people and the history
It's all about the people
of this storied place, and I mean, we're just so fortunate that every ownership group had something to bring.
100%. Yep.
And you and Carlo,
and Linda.
Yeah, and Linda. I hate to phrase it this way, but it's so true. Kind of brought it into the sports entertainment venue of this particular century.
Yeah.
Because even when Dr. Don owned the place, it was still this tower that had been there for 30 years, and there was the pit entrance. You couldn't get more than one car through there at a time. Not that you wanted to, but it was a very
yeah. Well, and he, one of the first things that he had to do, and when he bought in late '97, and they repaved in '98, the track was in some level of disrepair, and it needed, not only did it need to be repaved, but there was pressure to increase the width of it and bring it up into an FIA spec of 40 feet in width, and that was a big initial investment that he made, was to let's get the track surface and new barriers in areas. Let's get the track, back to being a great racetrack, and we'll worry about the infrastructure next.
Right.
So maybe to kind of wrap up, one of the questions I wanted to ask some of the guests was, and it's kind of a hard question to answer, but is there one moment or one race or one, battle that you watched or got to report on that stands out in your mind as like the gold standard of racing, or of a motorsport moment at what was Mosport CTMP today? Is there anything that just like pops into your mind?
Oh, there's no doubt about in my mind. I mean, the thrill of being there right from the beginning is pretty much a thrill. But then the first truck race, listen, You could not beat it. It was exciting. It was dramatic. It was on all the evening news, on all the evening newscasts. It was, and you know, to this day, I have no idea how Max Pappas didn't, you know, if you get punched in the face, you automatically, you know, slap back. You know, it's just a part of being alive.
Yes, a reaction.
That there's a reaction to it. And the fact that she hauled off and slugged him, and he stood there with his arms folded and just looked at her, it was just incredible. And the crowd, you know, I mean, the crowd was still coming in when the race had started, you know. So you take the fact that it was one of the biggest crowds in years, you take the fact that it was, you know, all of these guys were going on to the Cup Series, you knew, and it's kind of set the standard for all the truck races.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. No. For Chase Elliott to get his first road race win at our place and have become the new road race king of Cup racing, NASCAR Cup racing is pretty cool. And you know, I've had him at my Corvette school in Nevada, and yeah, he's really, really impressive. Great car control, just a natural ability. Probably the two young guys that I actually got and I don't do right seat very often, but with the NASCAR kids, I would occasionally do that, and getting in the right seat with Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson, those were two that really impressed me, and I managed to get in the right seat with Jimmy. There was a guy with incredible car control from his dirt racing.
Right.
It was fun to do it, and no wonder that he was a 7-time champion.
Yeah, well, I'm cheering for him as far as his foray into the Indy cars. I'm not sure he's going to have the success that he's.
It's going to be a tough one. Yeah, I mean, it's you know, without a downforce car background, it's going to be tough. And you know, he's not, and he's 45 years old. So
yeah.
But he's incredibly talented. He's doing the road races. We'll see how he does. It'll be fun to watch.
Well, sure. No, absolutely. And I guess Grosjean is going to be there, and so he'll be able to take a NASCAR guy and a Formula One guy and throw them out there against Hinchcliffe and Dixon.
Yeah.
And
hey, before we go, why don't we you want to get a little something in about Frank Orr?
Let me tell you my favorite Frank Orr story. Oh, okay. It's 1972, and it's the year of the Canada-Russia series.
Ah, yes.
And Frank is the hockey writer. But the Grand Prix was on in September, and they wanted Frank to do the Grand Prix too. So he covered the first 4 games in Canada, and then Trent Frayne went to Sweden, I think, because they went and played 2 exhibition games in Sweden, and then they got back to the serious stuff when they got to Moscow. So it's one of those days when a fog has settled over CTMP.
I was there.
It doesn't happen that often anymore, but it happened that day. And every now and again, they send Jackie Stewart or somebody out to say there or whatever to take a run around, and they'd come back and say, no, can't see well enough. Now, in the meantime, the hockey game is on. And Frank says to me, come on, Harvey isn't in his office and he's got a little TV in there. So let's go in and watch the game. So we're in there and you're torn. You're torn because here's the Grand Prix, which you want to see and you want to cover it. But in the meantime, the fate of the nation is resting on these guys, right? And so we're kind of sitting there saying, hope the fog keeps down until this is over. So we watched the whole game in there. And Gilbert Perrault scored an incredible goal where he got the puck and literally went right around one of the Soviet defensemen, and he scored on Tretiak. And Frank looks at me, and Frank had the fastest wit going.
Yes, he did.
He looks at me and he says, he put that puck in his mouth and he took it out his ass. True. That's true. But Frank loved motorsport. He loved the people in motorsport.
Yeah.
Well, listen, it's been a lot of fun.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you very much for asking me. And of course, Sam will now go through and clip out the bad parts. And